toll the coronavirus is taking in this nation and around the world. But while pandemics like this one have claimed millions of lives, one vector of disease has an even more fearsome record. It's the tiny mosquito. The story is detailed in the recent book, The Mosquito, A Human History of Our Deadliest Predator. And as author Timothy Winegard tells us, this dangerous pest has not only affected our health, but our history. Before COVID-19, she was the villain, transferring diseases frontline healthcare workers sought to annihilate.
The mosquitoes.
The mosquito.
The mosquito.
Mosquitoes.
The mighty mosquito infects tens of thousands each year. Last summer, we traveled to Mérida, Mexico, south of the border, to see one of those preemptive strikes in action. How bad were the mosquitoes here?
A veces cuando nos pican, pues nos dan calentura.
They have fever when it bites them. That's kind of one of the signs of illness.
Dengue fever survivor Maria del Solope is on the offensive, allowing indoor insecticide spraying in her home. It's an innovative approach in the war on mosquitoes.
We can have a reduction of over 70% in the number of mosquitoes for up to 6 months.
4 times more effective than aerial spraying, says Professor Gonzalo Vasquez Procopec, who's part of a team from Emory University that's allied with scientists from the Autonomous University of the Yucatan. Why is this important to people in the United States?
We have the mosquitoes in the U.S., so the more we know about methods that can control them, the more applicable they might become.
Is this mosquito territory?
It could be. The whole planet is mosquito territory. 110 trillion of them at any given time.
Historian Timothy Winegard, author of the book The Mosquito, is fascinated by the bug, especially the female, because she's the one who bites and transmits disease. He says we weren't her only prey.
70% of dinosaur species regionally were either extinct or endangered by the time the meteor crashes into the Yucatan Peninsula.
Come on, you're saying that the dinosaur was endangered by the mosquito?
Certain dinosaur species were certainly either already extinct or endangered from mosquito-borne and sandfly-borne diseases.
But Winegard says putting man's relationship with the mosquito into context is even more mind-blowing.
She was far more lethal than the minds of the most brilliant generals or man-made weapons. Disease up until the Second World War took 65% of deaths on the battlefield.
Think of that. Caesar, Hannibal, Genghis Khan, the Crusaders, and every invasion, migration, and conflict.
So depending on immunity or where the wars were fought, one side usually benefited from her destruction of the other side, and she, decided the fate of empires and nations in countless wars, certainly from Alexander all the way to the Second World War.
Mosquitoes likely hitched a ride aboard the Nina, Pinta, and Santa Maria, and thousands of slave ships that transported human cargo across the Atlantic.
They very quickly started vectoring malaria and other diseases.
And Africans had immunity.
Right, which is partly why they became such a lucrative commodity on the plantation systems. European indentured servants or workers were dying in droves of mosquito-borne disease.
Then there's the American Revolution. The forces of Generals Washington and Lafayette didn't do it by themselves. But they had a little help.
They had a lot of help. Cornwallis says very clearly to his commander, General Clinton, and also in his diary, that the surrender was not caused by anything, the Americans or French did, but because he had roughly 35% of his troops available to fight because they were absolutely shredded by malaria.
So the birth of our nation we owe to the mosquito?
Indeed. She is a founding mother of the United States.
Still, she plagued millions of Americans from the end of the 17th century to the beginning of the 20th with malaria and yellow fever. The death toll from yellow fever alone was more than 100,000.
The CDC was established in 1946, and at that time it was known as the Communicable Disease Center.
And before that, the Office of Malaria Control, says CDC research entomologist Dr. John Gimnick. Its mission was to protect U.S. troops, and the government even enlisted the likes of Theodore Seuss Geisel, better known as Dr. Seuss,
Attaboy, Dopey, killer, good and dead.
along with Walt Disney and his 7 dwarfs. By the mid-1950s, the U.S. curbed the spread of most mosquito-borne illnesses. DDT, our main weapon of choice. Though highly effective, it was discontinued in part for polluting the environment and possible links to cancer. Gimnick says now the highly adaptable predator is back on the hunt and gaining ground.
So we're monitoring to make sure that they remain susceptible to the chemicals that we apply. And then, of course, we want to look for new tools.
And as she expands her range across the planet, human defense is moving to what some describe as a form of biological warfare. So I presume this is your factory?
Yes.
Mosquito factory.
Mosquito factory.
Scientist Abdiel Martin Park is raising male mosquitoes infected with a bacteria called Wolbachia that effectively sterilizes them. You need a wild mosquito,
A female, yeah.
to mate with the infected mosquitoes.
When they mate, the egg is going to be dead.
Some have already questioned the ethics of such approaches, which include going even further, altering the DNA of the insect to inhibit its ability to transmit disease. It's all on the mind of scientists like Professor Vasquez Procopec, who are leading the charge. Will there be a day that we won't have these epidemics anymore?
We hope so. That's in a way the goal that all of us as scientists have, to have a positive benefit in a world in which we might still have some circulation of these pathogens, but the harm they produce would be so minimum that we won't have to worry about it.
So much of what we've done to eradicate some of those mosquito-borne illnesses are certainly being looked at in the process now. Context is everything in our fight against corona, but it's really interesting to see how history is influenced by disease.
Yeah,
and we will be talking about this one.
You're right, Michelle, and even more interesting to hear about all of that, especially in this time. Well, the cry of play ball has finally rung out.